Welcome to The Wing, the emotional and financial health check you never knew you needed.
Hello, ladies, and welcome to another episode of The Wing. We have returning guest, Ashleigh Kuhn. Hi, Ash.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure. And I must note that this is take 3. Ash and I have had this podcast scheduled in to record twice before. The first time we were battling with daycare drop-off situations, and the second time I was in hospital. So we had to rearrange our planning and get back online when we both could. So it's really good to be recording again and be chatting about some relevant things that are hopefully going to help our listeners. So today we're blending two kind of topics, and obviously we're going to find a way to weave them in together. But I want to start with something that Ash wrote. Ash has a newsletter that she sends out, and it arrives in my inbox at 7 a.m, which I really love because when I check my emails, it's one of the first things I read. So I highly recommend subscribing to Ash's newsletter if you want more Ash, because I feel like she covers a lot of interesting topics around not just nutrition and health and wellness, but life, like practical tips, practical situations, things that are actually happening in her life that are relevant to other people's lives. And the amount of times I've read Ash's newsletter and been like, oh my gosh, yes, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. Like it's very well written and palatable, easy to read, and very relatable. So one of the things Ash wrote about, now this is a little off track to our typical kind of, I guess, health and wellbeing kind of segment with Ash, but she titled it Operating as a Single Parent. And I think that personally, single parents are operating at max capacity at all times, and that they are dividing different priorities and conquering a lot of different conversations and having to mix, lives and co-parenting strategies to benefit their children in the best possible way. I know a lot of single parents out there, and I see the hard work that they're doing, and it makes you reflect on how you operate in your own life if that isn't necessarily your situation. So Ash, I might throw to you and get you to give us a bit more context around the topic and what brought you to write about it, and tell us a bit more.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, thank you for that beautiful feedback on my newsletter. That's nice to hear.
Pleasure.
And I totally agree. I think single parents are amazing. And I also don't want to pretend for a second that I have any of the same challenges as single parents, as someone, who is married and has a partner. But I basically came up because I think a lot of women will relate to this. And I'm going to be vulnerable about my own relationship for a second here. But I think that the mental load and the domestic load is something that my husband James and I have really struggled with in our relationship. And I think that's very common for a lot of couples. And basically, it's been very much like a work in progress and kind of a learning curve for us to navigate life as a family from that point of view. And one day, I felt like James was just really supporting me really well. I feel like lots of stuff was happening. I was like, what's going on here? And I said, thank you so much. Like, I'm really feeling a lot of the pressure eased up lately because you are so on the ball with tackling a lot of the domestic stuff. And he was like, oh yeah, I decided to operate as though I am a single parent. At first I was like so offended because I was like, what do you mean? Like, I feel like I do so much. Like, what do you mean? And he was like, no, it's because that way I'm able to kind of not assume that things are going to get done, and it helps me really like take action and show up and support our family because I'm not assuming that it's going to get done if I don't do it. And it's just been a game changer for our relationship, to be honest.
So complete mindset shift in that, rather than thinking in a way that, maybe it's looking at a pile of washing or seeing dishes in the sink or, an unmade bed or whatever it may be, dirty bathroom, unvacuumed floor, like all of those little things that you're kind of, as you're around your own home, you're looking at and you're like, need to get to that. I need to get to that. I'll do that tomorrow. You're constant, like we have a lot of decision fatigue, I think, as people in general. Anyone who's living in a house is going to be able to relate to that. But you take it on as your own responsibility. And sometimes if you've not had that conversation in a relationship, whether it is with your partner or even with a roommate, you're still going to have struggles around that part of, looking after the house and not being able to compartmentalize and think, oh, I can see that there, I'll get to it later. Or then thinking, is somebody else going to pick that up and do that for me? Like you kind of get into that mindset of what James went through in shifting his thinking around, okay, well, I'm just going to presume that that's not going to get done so that that's my responsibility. And then you're coming home or you're around and you're going, oh, I feel a bit redundant. But he taking that on himself has made such a difference in your relationship because he's been able to identify a lot of the things you were doing. And then, now you're walking around going, oh, that's done. Oh, that washing's gone. Oh, that floor's vacuumed. Like it's teamwork.
Almost. I wouldn't say it's quite at that extent. But I think the other thing is it's kind of like I do feel like we tiptoe around this conversation a little bit because we don't want to cause offense because there might be some families where, maybe the man does do a lot of the household labor. And I'm going to be, a little bit brutal here and say that in most of the time that's not the case. And that's not just my opinion. That's actually like a well-documented thing for a lot of families. So there's a book called Fair Play. I think the author's Ronsky. And it is about the domestic load for families, often between men and women in heterosexual relationships. And they have a really great Instagram, which everyone should follow. It's fantastic. They published this study that they ran. I think it was 500 women with young children.
Referencing a study around this, it holds a lot of weight. Like you said, Ash, it's a delicate subject, right? Because we don't want to assume that every household is the same because it's not. But having a study that we can reference around it, I think is brilliant because it backs up for those listening that if you can relate to this, then this is absolutely relevant to your life and how shifting your mindset to operating like a single parent could actually help in a conversation with your partner.
Yeah. And it validates the experience, right? I don't know how watertight this is in terms of how they collected data, but I also don't think it's going to surprise anyone listening, to be honest. So they found overall mothers reported greater responsibility for their partner for the cognitive labour of 29 out of 30 tasks and the physical household labour for 28 out of 30 tasks. That really, rang true for me for a lot of our relationship, if I'm being honest. And I think that is tricky because there are probably lots of factors that contribute to that, that kind of like traditional gender role of women managing the household. It's tough because even our parents' generation, like I think that was internalized and kind of played out for decades. So to dismantle that, it's tricky. I think it's tricky for a lot of us. That's the way a lot of families operate and a lot of the way men and women of our generation were brought up seeing that modelled. But the thing is, the same study found that when mothers engaged in more cognitive household labour than their partners, they reported more depressive symptoms, more symptoms of exhaustion, overwhelm and burnout, worse physical health and worse overall mental health. And I don't think there is a single woman listening that would be surprised by that.
I think you're right. It's certainly something I can relate to personally. And I think, and as you know, and I've been open about sharing this in the past about the conversations that Jake and I have had to have that have been really frank and really honest, usually after some sort of outburst that I have had out of anger or disappointment or frustration or decision fatigue, whatever it may have been. I wrote down my values at one point in time, and I remember one of them is initiative. So if I'm not seeing initiative in others that I surround myself with, I find myself feeling really frustrated. But what I've needed to do is shift my mindset because I can't control other people's initiative, obviously, and that's an expectation I have. But if I can shift the way I think about it, like if, for example, recently, so Jake's had a few away trips, a mix of work and fun, mostly work, but I still find those times when I am solo really challenging. And I feel like he always thanks me, for the opportunity to be able to do these things. And I think, well, look, you need to, part of when it's to do with your work, you absolutely need to be involved in these things because, you're keeping the lights on, firstly. But then myself getting into that single parent mindset as well, like no one's coming to save you today, or, you need to be as organized as possible and, focus on the task at hand, and maybe other things need to go by the wayside during those periods of time. Like, if I can't get to my washing pile, or I can't, Windex the fridge like I like to do as a small hobby of mine. Silly things that don't really matter. It also makes me focus more on the kids, because I feel like those are probably my moments where I am most present, because I'm not distracted by anybody else except for them. And I wouldn't call them distracting. They're literally my main focus. So if one of the three needs something, that's what I'm doing. It's difficult when all three need something at once, but because I only have two hands. But it's something that, since I read your newsletter and we had a chat about it, Ash, I felt like, oh, that's a mindset shift I can get into as well when Jake actually isn't around. So that, yeah, I feel too, it can be quite empowering. It can be exhausting and very tiring, but there is, I think, an element of empowerment in that mindset, because you've got pure total independence on and doing things exactly how you know to do them. I also find sometimes if there are other people around, you end up kind of managing the people, like the adults around. So, or there might be questions coming to you about things like, oh, where does this go? Or where's that bottle? Or should they be doing this? Or should they be doing that? And it's kind of like, like you're trying to like answer you're trying to focus on the task at hand, like with your kids and your household, but then you're also having the extra conversations around answering all these additional questions. So sometimes bringing it back to the single parent mindset is actually can be a valuable thing, because you can kind of empower yourself and build confidence in that way. So do you have any more information on that study, Ash?
Like I said, it's definitely worth checking out. It's Fair Play Life on Instagram. It's fantastic. They often will talk about research related to domestic load and kind of, like I said, division of household labour, which I think is a really interesting and relevant topic for a lot of families.
Definitely. So in terms of the conversations that you and James had, Ash, about the domestic load, was there anything, how did you bring it up in the first place, or what triggered the conversation for you?
I mean, I'm kind of laughing because
James is right there.
he is.
Hey, James.
Like a lot of arguments, like you mentioned with Jake, like really a lot of arguments. And I think it kind of progressively became more of an issue, because I think that you probably, like when you move in with a partner, this comes into the conversation. Then when you have a baby, it comes into the conversation massively, because there are so many more things to manage. But I think where it really starts to be an issue for a lot of women that I speak to is that return to work after maternity leave, because you've been in this pattern where, one person is supplying the majority of the household income in a lot of situations. And because you're at home with the baby, you might have more time on your hands, so to speak, even though it definitely does not feel that way. But, you're in the house more. So you might be, especially as babies get older, you're more, I feel like a lot of the domestic load tends to fall to you. And then when you go back to work, it becomes completely unmanageable, and it's really difficult because you've kind of built up these habits and these expectations. So logically, you both know, okay, I'm returning to work. I don't have the same capacity to manage these things, but actually making that behavioral shift between you as a couple can be really challenging. And so we definitely found that. And I think, the unequal domestic load has obviously been around for a very long time, but the concept of the mental load, I think it's just becoming a lot more well known and discussed. And I think we've got better language around it. Men are starting to talk about it more, which is really important. And, it's kind of like an ongoing thing, even between James and I. Like, to give you a really good recent example, Freddie, my 3-year-old son, came home from my mother-in-law's the other day, and he had like a jagged toenail. And James said to me, like, oh yeah, Mum said to tell you that it needs to just be like filed down. And I said to James, like, can't you file a toenail? And like, I have a wonderful mother-in-law. She's great. But like I said, like, it's not even like, it's definitely not a malicious thing. Often it's not even really a conscious thing. It's just kind of this assumed role that's been reinforced for decades of their lives, where that's kind of like mother's territory. I'm like, well, you have the same capacity, particularly for James and I, we work in a business together. He's got the same capacity to file a toenail as I do, like I didn't necessarily sign up for toenail duty when I became a mother.
Oh my gosh. That's such a good example. It's a live example. Like, it's It is funny, isn't it? It's hard to quantify those types of jobs, and I think we've spoken about it before. A lot of the, household duties or duties like filing a toenail can be somewhat invisible. But again, it's the question and the presumed responsibility of that's a you job. But in our day and age, like there's such a shift. Women are working, and men are working too. So there's competing priorities in all corners of a household, typically. Yes, we are talking about heterosexual relationships in this situation, in an environment with kids. Typically, that's obviously the angle, but sometimes it's a case of, and certainly in our situation, it's a case of, because Jake is very aware of my unrelenting standards and the ways that I like to do things. Sometimes it's a case that he doesn't want to step on my toes or do something wrong or upset me more by, taking something on and then it not panning out correctly. We've obviously lowered the bar of success a lot in our household recently, with the introduction of our third baby. So a lot of things to me don't matter as much as they did previously. Obviously, we still have a clean and relatively tidy house most of the time, and there's food and whatnot. Like, all of our basics are covered, but the standards are certainly not as high as before. So I think now Jake feels welcomed into his own space to actually just do things to help and know that it'll just near enough's good enough and thank you for your effort, and less about, or I didn't want to do that because I didn't know how you wanted to do it. But similar with other relationships and dynamics in a family as well. Like you said, this was your mother-in-law, who is obviously helpful. She obviously had Freddie, and, that was a great help to you guys. But then maybe she didn't want to, for lack of a better phrase, step on any toes about the toenail, because she wanted to, leave that to you. Just, because if something happened or he got hurt or she didn't do it correctly or something like that, she might have felt not as, that would have made her feel uneasy. So it's also about, for us to try and understand where the other people in our lives are coming from. But it is also frustrating in the same moment, because I think our son the other day was climbing all over the dining table. I've removed everything from I used to have like really nice display. I love displays, put displays and stuff everywhere. And I used to have dried flowers and beads in a little bowl and a candle and everything. Anyway, that's long gone because he can climb on the table now. But he's climbing on the table, and yeah, I don't remember what it was, but they're like, should he be climbing up on the table? Meanwhile, I think I was feeding the baby, and then our eldest daughter was like running around on her bike or doing something. It was a bit of a mad moment. And I just I froze, because I was like, my brain doesn't know where to go next, because I'm trying to prioritize what's the most important. I'm thinking, I guess, okay, my son falling off the dining table is probably a bigger priority. I knew he wouldn't fall, but if I'm being asked a question, it's sort of like, oh, if you see something, do something, rather than, just kind of observe and ask questions. But it is difficult to try and find that balance, particularly with extended family as well, because you don't want to, they're only trying to help, but it doesn't eliminate decision fatigue or anything like that.
Yeah. I love that you've stepped in though and kind of, recognized and taken responsibility for your part of that, issue in the relationship of being like, well, I need to let the standard go. James and I have definitely had the same kind of conversations where you've got to be open to potentially lowering the standard a little bit, especially while they're stepping up to support you and learning these new skills. Because even with cleaning the bathroom, that was something in our relationship, we have a cleaner now, thank God. But before that, where I was doing it a lot, and James was like, well, I just don't know how to do it. And I was like, well, I didn't go to bathroom cleaning school. I wasn't born with that skill. I learnt it through practice, and you can too. And I think that honestly, that has been quite empowering for him as well. It's and it's the same, with caring for a baby sometimes. I think as mums, sometimes we always need to be the one to go in and soothe. And, it's quicker if I do it. They'll stop crying faster if I do it. And sometimes in doing that, you can actually deny your partner the opportunity to build those skills in that relationship. And it's the same with household stuff. You've got to step back a little bit, let them learn, potentially make mistakes, and be there to softly educate if needed and requested. But, I totally get that. Like you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, well, I need help, but it needs to be done to this immaculate standard straight off the bat.
Exactly. I find myself a lot at the moment because I do have decision fatigue. If Jake asks me something, he'll ask me now, he's like, oh, how do we clean this? And then sometimes I just say, I don't know. and, then, and then if I say, I don't know, it's out of like lack of ability to actually focus on that at that moment in time. And then we'll often joke around and get random products out of the kitchen drawer and have a crack, and we're like, oh, well, that's just gonna have to do. Like it's not. Whereas before I'd be like, okay, so firstly I'm gonna wet the chuck swipe, and then I'm gonna get the pink stuff and I'm gonna scrub it, and then I'm gonna rewash the chuck and go through full detail. Whereas now I'm just like, I don't know. Like I don't know. Let's just
Sometimes it's
figure
really
it out.
nice to say that and just like offload the responsibility. You can figure this out. I believe in you. You know, you're a competent person. You've got this. And that's the balance, right? Sometimes, especially like you've said, like when you don't have the capacity or bandwidth, it's quite a good option to be like, I don't know. But I've also definitely had to be like, you know, try not to be like condescending. I think that's part of it too, is like try to be, you know, either, yeah, I don't know, or like, well, when I do it, you know, this is how I do it. These are the steps, and kind of go through it in like a patient way rather than being frustrated that they don't know how to do it, because I think that it's quite a difficult spot to be in a relationship. Like that's a tricky situation to navigate.
And on the flip side, there's plenty of things I don't know how to do. Like I didn't go to light bulb training school, but Jake seems to know how to do that. So I think there's, you know, or there's the internet needs I do know how to do that now, but different things like that. Basically anything to do with electronics or electricity is not my skill set. So that's situations where I do lean on him for that. Having said that though, I did have a single parent moment over the weekend where we had a power outage, which was funny because this used to always happen to my mum when Dad would take me and my brother away for the school holidays, and Mum would stay at home with the horses and everything, and always a blackout. And she would be furious at Dad, like, and at us, like the power's gone out because she would lose they live on a property, so they would, if the power's off for more than a certain amount of time, you lose everything in your fridge and your freezer, and you don't have power, you don't have hot water. Like it's an issue, and it's scary when you by yourself. Anyway, on the weekend, Jake was away and the power went out, and my mum was the first person I texted because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. Guess what? The power's out. And she's like, no. And then she said, and anyway, I figured out our nanny was here, which was great. Did have an extra set of hands. I wasn't totally solo, so I can't claim that. But having her just we managed to get the older two bathed and into bed, and it was fine. And then the internet went and all the power and the hot water. So at least we had two at bay. Then we had the baby. So our nanny's holding baby, and then I'm running in and out to the switchboard, like, because it was a big storm, and this is kind of why it happened. And then we jimmied up a extension cord from upstairs into I realized I was testing the different power points. I knew which ones were working, which ones weren't. So I had a power extension cord running from the fridge to another wall because that wall hadn't shot the power, but the fridge one had. So we saved the fridges. And then we were trying to figure out the hot water. So we just went without. And then I got onto an electrician who was planned to come the next day. And I thought after that, we got it all solved, except for the next day when I went out to the hot water unit and I could see the switches were in different directions. So I took a gamble and I was like, oh, I think that needs to match that one, and that means it's on. Then I Googled it, and the electrician told me I'll take about 3 hours to heat up again. And I was like, okay, cool. So I waited 3 hours, still no hot water. And then I was like, oh no, I flicked them the wrong way. So I went,
oh no.
I went back outside and I flicked them both up, and the hot water was back on within 10 minutes. So anyway, and it like little things like that where I was like, I need to figure this out because I don't have Jake, who would typically be my backstop in that situation, to be running around, you know, doing things and, you know, coming in and out with figuring out the switchboard and stuff like that. So those moments can sometimes lead to actual light bulb moments when I did get the lights back on, and I did it all by myself, and I was very proud of myself. And it's kind of, it's like it can go both ways in that instance. Like just because, you know, someone's good at one thing doesn't mean they're good at everything. So, and it's about that teamwork conversation. But Ash, you mentioned as well finding the balance. As I said, this is a little off track for our topics today, but we wanted to kind of blend two topics together in this episode so that we can give as much value as possible. There was another thing that Ash wrote about in one of her newsletters about how the scales lie. This probably feeds into the balancing act, I think, in the household as well. Like, that's the one topic. The next topic is, okay, how do we look after ourselves? So we're trying to give each other space and time to exercise or get outside for a bit and get some fresh air, have some kid-free time, make a healthy meal, even just order the groceries. I need half an hour to myself to do that. Unpack the groceries is another thing, like those little things that keep the household running. But then we feel like we're trying to do our best in that space, and we're both on what we are trying to call a weight loss journey. We're doing our best. We're surviving still. I wanted to learn more from you, Ash, about like your professional view on how the scales lie, because that's a measure of our success that we have. Like, we weigh ourselves every morning and we're keeping track of that information and, trying to see that anything we did, in the last week, is that making a difference this week? And then we kind of go on a different roller coaster with like, okay, it's not working, or we lose interest, or we decoy and things like that. So when you wrote about that, I thought that's an interesting topic that does tie into the whole balance of a household. So maybe you can talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this came up because I speak to my nutrition clients about this all the time. It's always a really big sort of like education piece around, when you are trying to lose fat. I think sometimes we have this expectation, especially if you're weighing yourself every day, that the scale is going to continue to go down in a very linear fashion, in a predictable way, further down every day. That's very rarely the case, because as much as we can control our behaviors and, kind of execute the things that we need to do to be facilitating a calorie deficit, which obviously leads to fat loss, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see it on the scales every day. And that is because mostly due to water retention, and we retain water for lots of different reasons. So if you ever felt really puffy, and you're like a bit swollen, particularly in your face or in your body, often, women experience this in the lead up to their period, in their late luteal phase. That's water retention. And it also happens to men, not because of the luteal phase, but because of a range of factors, including muscle inflammation. So if you do like a really intense workout and you have some muscle inflammation, you're more likely to retain water. If you have a salty meal, that's high in sodium, you're likely to retain water. And even if you have a lot more carbs than you normally have, the body stores carbohydrates alongside water in your body. So all of those things can lead to your body holding on to water. Alcohol can be one too. And that is going to mask fat loss. So when you jump on the scales, you might see a higher number than you expect. But part of that is going to be the extra water that your body's holding. And then usually that sort of will decrease and your body will release that water over a couple of days, especially if you return to your kind of more normal behaviors. And it's not a sign that you're doing anything wrong. I think that's where people sometimes start to panic. They're like, what am I doing wrong? What could I do better to sort of get better results on the scales? I think one thing I try to help clients do is try to remove the moral element of body weight, scale weight, because I think, if you are really attached to the outcome on the scale and you weigh yourself and it's higher than you expect, you can feel really bad about yourself. It can impact your whole day. And we don't want that, especially because one single daily weight doesn't really hold much value. That's why we'll often get clients to weigh themselves daily so that we can get an average across the week and across the month, because one daily scale weight, it's just a data point. It's nothing more. It's not a success indicator in the long term or even necessarily in the short term. It really is just a data point. And a nice way to look at it is instead of seeing it as like a mirror reflection of your worth or your success or anything like that, kind of popping on your little, like scientist white lab coat, and your little glasses and being like, cool, what does this mean? And seeing it more as just a number, as a data point, rather than some kind of reflection of your worth as a person.
That's deep and so true. Like it can be really deflating, and I definitely know that feeling. And I mean, I understand it now, obviously, because I'd been with you, Ash, for a while there, and understood that the daily weight is, we're collecting data. It's not like that. That information shouldn't be what dictates my mood for the rest of that particular day. It's a journey, and I knew that you're looking at my stats over the course of a week, 2 weeks, a month. Obviously, I was going in a different direction at the time because I was pregnant, but, now I'm trying to look at that in reverse and, look back in chronometer. I know I can see, back, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and, watching those trends happen can be really motivating. But if you get caught in the days, which is easy to do, especially when you have little people around and you find yourself snacking on peanut butter on toast like I did this morning, it can feel like a bit of a scramble, I think. And then you throw in the occasional weigh yourself, and if you're not tracking that properly, it can feel like everything's messy. And, no matter what effort you go to, maybe it's not making the impact that you want it to. And then throw in a weekend away, or like with one of you away, or, general chaos that can come with having children around. It can just feel like, I can't tell you how many times in the last month or two, Jake and I have referred to our lives or our situation as the wheels are falling off. And Jake said to me the other day, he goes, well, if there's 4 wheels on the car, then surely we can manage 2 each. And I was like, okay, that's a really logical way to break that down. What about the fuel? What about the services of this car that we just can't seem to drive at the moment? But I don't know. It's our year of trenches, so we're giving ourselves a little bit of grace there. But it's a valuable topic, Ash, and a nice reminder, especially for parents that are trying to balance the load between one another and having that clear line of communication. I think the single parent mindset. I watch single parent friends of mine that I just am in absolute awe of. Jake grew up in a single parent family, and I always think about that in those crazy moments. I think it helps me, I guess, compartmentalize, appreciate, and think we are all capable, but we need to keep the lines of communication open in coupled relationships that are sharing the load with kids. And not that single parents aren't sharing that load, because in a lot of cases they are. It's just in a separate household, which of course can come with its own challenges and varying strains of difficulty between the conversations that need to happen and the getting agreement and buy-in from both parties and things like that. So again, it's a touchy topic, and we're obviously actively wanting to share the right information and say the right things, because we want to acknowledge the hard work of single parents out there that we watch. We both have friends in that situation. And then also, link that to, okay, but for our couples out there, there are notes that we can all be taking out of single parent books, because there is a lot of quality mindset and a lot of strength in the mindset of those individuals and couples and families and things like that. So I think hopefully that message has come across on this topic. I think obviously the reference to the study, which we will make sure is tagged in the Instagram post as well for this episode, for anyone who wants to continue listening or reading, or I'm definitely going to follow that page as well, Ash. I think, there's certainly, some, at least some validation points in there for a lot of parents, men and women across the board. So
this is all of us, right? It really speaks to how much we have going on as parents. We're trying to manage, you've got all this domestic load, you're running a household, you're raising kids, you've got a career, but you're also looking after, your own health goals, and there's a lot going on. So I feel like hopefully it resonates. And like I said, the study definitely validates it. But I think the more we can talk about struggling with these sorts of things when it comes to domestic load, when it comes to being a parent and finding it challenging, I feel like that can be quite nice to, validate people's experience and understand that we're all struggling with this and trying to find our way and manage it in a way that works for our families.
Exactly. Well said. And Ash, I think too, I found this when you were coaching me, in that you look at someone's life holistically. Like you were, working with me as a pregnant person at the time, and, raising 2 other kids, and having like all the things that were going on in my household at the time, but that your understanding of my life was very useful to how that was applied to my health and wellness and fitness during the time as well. So I think that, for anyone who is struggling with it, like Ash is not going to come in and, be your psychologist and mentor and do all of the, maybe wash your dishes, I'm not sure. But I think from a nutrition coaching perspective, Ash is really good in looking at things holistically. So if you're not having a great week in your, like as you're tracking or eating or shopping or whatever it might be, Ash will look at all of the factors in your week to make sure that you can still show yourself self-compassion and, do better in the following week or, change certain things to better accommodate your lifestyle. So I think it's probably worth, Ash, as well, if you can just give us a little shout out to how people can contact you if they are looking for help and guidance in the nutrition coaching space.
Probably the best place to find me is on Instagram, Nutrition by Ashleigh. Yeah, as Kay said, love working with women. I feel like, once you become a mother, it really shifts how you view these things. And a lot of the advice that's out there for women around health and fitness, is perhaps not aimed at people who have quite so many plates spinning at once. And so I definitely feel like the more we can have women talking about realistic ways to tackle these things amongst all your other values and the important stuff you have going on, hopefully that is my page is a place where you can find that.
Perfect. And Ash, your newsletter, how will everybody sign up to that?
Oh, it's on Substack. It is Big Feelings by Ashleigh Kuhn. There is also a link to subscribe in my Instagram bio.
Highly recommend subscribing to Ash's newsletter. That's from a genuine place. I literally read it every time it comes through because there's always a tidbit in there that makes me not feel alone. So I highly recommend you get onto that to our listeners. But anyway, thank you so much, Ash, for joining us again on The Wing. It's always a pleasure to have you, always such a valuable chat. I love looking at things through different lenses as well, like even if the conversation is a little off our usual beaten path. So thank you everyone for listening, and we look forward to catching you on the next episode of The Wing. Bye-bye.
Is your connection a bit funny?
Yeah, I've got bad internet at the moment. It just popped up on the screen.
I got a little notification being like, upload quality will be higher. I was like, okay, good. Cool. I was like trying to strangely hear some of it. And then also right at the beginning, James plugged in his earphones. And I don't know if I had a bit of a confused face because his earphones took over as my default audio source. So I couldn't hear you. And I was like, oh no, trying to turn my Bluetooth off. Oh God.
That's all right. Knox was barking at the groceries getting delivered and I was like, where's my mute button? And I was hitting the microphone. This microphone is so good. It picks up everything.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, how funny. I feel like between trying to get this to happen and then trying to manage all the other shit going on around us, honestly, I'm so impressed with us. We're amazing.